Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Paul from Foundations. Hope you've got better weather than I have here. It's a very wet and horrible Tuesday afternoon. So as usual on Tuesday afternoon, we'll bring you some content straight to your desk, as we've been doing since the start of lockdown. We'll have our regular monthly webinar in a fortnight, and another one on adaptations in social housing, particularly in housing association properties, the week after. And planning something a bit more special for September as well, but more about that on another day. So for this afternoon, I'm very pleased to welcome Emma Luddington and Kate Cunningham from Living Well at Home, who, if you attended our monthly webinar 2 or 3 weeks ago, you'd have heard a preview of this. So for most of this afternoon, I'm going to hand over to Emma to run through the full webinar for you.
Welcome everybody to this afternoon's CPD session. Really excited to be back and working in partnership with Foundations to deliver this 1 hour CPD. It's an interactive one. We have lots of people joining the webinar, which is absolutely fantastic. And we want to hear your questions. We want to hear your challenges. We want to, nice ones, of course, no, any old challenges. And we also want to hear your comments. So do get sort of talking into the chat box for asking those sorts of questions. For logistics, Paul will be on hand to help you with that, and we'll be here to sort of answer any questions that you have about the content that we're going to be talking about today. So basically, welcome. We're here for an hour, and we're going to be looking at simple tips to future-proof homes for a better later life. And we're here for an hour, as I say, to do some questions and some answers with you, and to run through some content. But first of all, let me introduce myself and my colleague Kate. Kate is going to be picking up all your questions, and she works with me on Living Well at Home. And certainly, we've got a little bit of training coming up later in the year, and we'll be working together on that. I'll be leading the main part of the presentation of the sessions today, but we've really shared the preparation of this session. So I'm an architect with about 25 years of experience in inclusive design, housing adaptation in terms of planning policy, housing governance through Habintech Housing Association, working on a variety of design schemes, working as an inclusive design consultant. And more recently, in the last 5 years, have been really focusing in on homes and the opportunity to make homes age friendly. So I come with a broad brush background from laying a brick in my early years of apprenticeship, right up now through to some governmental policy and some work on the bigger picture stuff. And we sort of sit in between that. So I hope to explain a little bit about that shortly. So what's our motto, and what do we want to share with you today? The principle of small changes to stay as you are. So we are all rapidly heading through our own life's journey. The days go quickly, and in order to benefit from a good, independent later life with choice, what we say is actually, if you start to make small changes at any stage of your life, you're more likely to be able to do that, to live independently and live well. So let's, without further ado, go into this. Just one reminder, keep your questions coming, keep your comments coming. We will be stopping as we go through the session to pick up on those questions and do some answers and so forth. So that's all part of this session. So who are we talking about? Well, we're talking about people like Joyce. This is Joyce, and you won't have met her in your professions as either a home improvement agent, agency, occupational therapy, trusted assessor, any form of health or social care, because Joyce is living independently. Until about 1.5 years ago, she was actually working in a part-time job as a lifeguard when she was unfortunately made redundant because the swimming pool closed. She's incredibly active, but Joyce has had falls. The only thing is they haven't been injurious falls yet. There are hundreds of thousands of people living the same kind of life as Joyce. And what Joyce chooses is like 94% of other people. They want to stay living independently at home in later life. But we have a real challenge on our hand, because actually our homes in in the UK particularly, but across Europe, simply aren't suitable for meeting the challenges. So in fact, only 7% of our homes are accessible, and we're going to touch on what accessible means in the next slide. So that's a tiny percentage when you actually look at this visual representation of the homes in the UK. And if we were to colour the number of households that occupied these houses that were aged 45 to 50 and over, it would be over half of the households. So we have a discrepancy there between the households that are likely to need some changes later on in life and the houses that we're living in at the moment. And just another statistic for you, 80% of the homes that we will be living in 2050 are already built. So even if we do the most outstanding job with all the new infrastructure investment and everything, if we do an outstanding job at building new homes, we still have the majority of our homes is already being built and not to accessible standards. So at the most basic, what is an accessible home? Well, there's 6 features that Europe counts, and these are the people that identified the 7%, that Europe counts as being an accessible home. So a step-free entrance, an entrance without steps up to it. A step-free threshold, now that's down to 15 millimeters, so a really, really small sort of threshold, and even that comes with conditions. Doors that are wide enough and circulation spaces that are big enough to cope with the changes, with the things that we might need in later life. That could be a walking frame. It could be actually just being a little bit less steady on your feet and being able to have that space so that you don't necessarily bang into the walls and the door openings. Space to carry trays through and space to have wheeled trolleys, as much as it is about having wheelchair accessible features in the property. And you'll notice here that we talk about being an accessible home if there's a toilet on the entrance level and space for a bed at entrance level. So we're not even talking about a lot of the work that you'll already be doing in terms of converting and extending and adding in things like wet rooms on the entrance level and perhaps an extra bedroom. So this, we're really talking about just an ability to go to the toilet, do a kind of like a bed wash, and putting a bed within another living space, not having those separate spaces. So this is pretty basic. Even above that challenge is a home that promotes independence in later life is actually much, much more than accessible. It also needs to be usable, and there are hundreds of little bits. We can't cover all of them today, of course, but there are hundreds of little factors that go into making a home usable. It's one that's safe and secure, and we certainly will be touching on that. And also healthy. Now, it's not very often that we think about whether our home is healthy. We focus on our own health, but how healthy is the home? Because we know that a healthy home promotes healthy householders. So we're going to be working and looking at these extra features because we know the accessible features. We've got to do what we can to address the other things before we have to much more. Right, the first question for you is about later life. What is later life and how do we plan for it? What is later life and how do we plan for it? So we a couple of polls today, and this is the first poll. So if Paul, you're okay to put the poll up, that would be fantastic. In the UK, at what age does old age begin? Now, this is a question. Go ahead and vote. This is a question that over 15,000 people across Europe were asked. At what age in the UK does old age begin? The age range of the questioners were from 15 up to 94. And then they took was what? 62, 69, 76 or 85? Paul, have you got the results? Are people still voting? I know there's a lot of people on the call today, so it may take a minute or two.
Yeah, still some votes coming through.
Okay, fantastic. You're not being marked, so if you're shy to answer, we don't know who's answering what. It's just quite an interesting thing to see what Paul will show the results once that comes up. I should say that we have derived all of the facts, the statistics, the informatives that come from the things that we talk about today from research, from highly credited research, all of which have been accredited either the government or by the Centre for Ageing Better. So if you want any more information about any of that, then by all you ask in the questions, and I'm happy to send information through. Is founded on research and fact. Okay, Paul, have you got the results?
I think so. I'll share them now.
Okay, right. 62, age 62, 25, 26, 69, 38%, the clear winner, 76, 29%, and 85, 7%. Well, I have to say, audience, you are the closest, the audiences that I've asked. You're the closest audience to answer the correct question. However, of you were correct. Paul, if you're happy to use the poll results now. In fact, it was 62 years old. Now, I will ask, if society thinks that 62 years old is the start of old age, what other sorts of unconscious biases about later life? And one of the things that we're really very keen to dispel is the idea is that actually people who are older are all the same. They all need the same things. They all want the same adaptations, and they all have the same impairments, which we very clearly, and most of us practitioners, as you will already know, that's simply not the case. But a lot of society, actually the rhetoric in the press, etc., tends to reinforce this belief that actually old age means you're a bit redundant, and we're very, very keen to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, thank you for that. So there's a link, though, between disability and later life. So we know that the incidence of disability rises with age. And we know that there's going to be, you know, by 2035, 23% of the population will be 65 plus. And that, of course, is going to increase for what we think will be around about 60 to 80 years before the population begins to restabilize actually a little bit. It's because of the baby boom generation that we're seeing coming through, and then we will get these waves as we go through the hundreds of years of history. So we have a large sector of the population that is living independently, wishes to do so, and doesn't necessarily think of themselves as being disabled. Now, this might be a large proportion of the population that actually, particularly if you're working in the public sector, you may not see, because the tendency is for, particularly if you're an occupational therapist, a trusted assessor, that you're likely to come across somebody that's come to you as a result of a crisis, a life-changing event that needs some really sort of major or substantial interventions. So this is what we're also talking about, is when the population, during the National Family Resources Survey, people were asked about the kind of impairments that they had and how it impacted on their life, it actually came out that about 44% of older adults are or would be classed as disabled under the Equality Act 2010. But a lot of people won't identify themselves as that. And so that's why it's important to start to make small changes that are gradual, that are incremental, that can change and grow and be incorporated into people's homes as they age organically. So this is my second and final poll for you, but please do keep the questions and comments coming as well. The most commonly reported impairment by older disabled people is, and Paul, if you could put the options up, there are 4 options. Is the most commonly reported impairment hearing? Is it vision? Is it mobility? Or is it memory loss? So again, get your votes in. We're not going to mark you. We don't know who's answering which question. And when you voted, have a think about what you think are the next 2 most commonly reported impairments. What are people saying in their own self-reporting resources survey responses? What are they saying is they're finding the hardest, the thing that they're having to navigate around the most? How are we doing, Paul? How are the votes coming in?
Yeah, I think it's slowing down. Got 81% voted so far.
Wow, okay, fantastic.
So I think last couple just coming through. So
and this is one of the, while Paul's just putting the panel poll question answers up or responses up, this is one of the most commonly the common things that we find when we go out into people's houses and we talk to them, is this quite fine to accommodate impairments and your needs. It's not a mark of hospitalization. So how are we doing, Paul?
There we go, there's the result.
Audience. So hearing, we've got 25%, vision 17%, mobility 54%, and memory loss just 4%. So those of you who voted for the mobility, you are absolute 52% of those older adults. So if we draw a comparison, that actually means 25% of older adults 65 have some kind of mobility difficulty. Now, of course, we're not talking about to reach, to dress, all those sorts of things that require you to move around without discomfort or difficulty. Now, those of you who had a chance to think about the next two, I wonder whether this is what you got. So the two most commonly after mobility reported impairments and difficulties is stamina, breathing and fatigue, and dexterity. So a lot of you who are going out to versus the end of the day, that difficulty, that explanation of impairment might change very rapidly. But actually we're here to try and make sure that the house accommodates for whatever stage that person is in, wherever they are during the day. And that, of course, comes by understanding what it is that the household wants. Okay, so here is the graph. This is really in because I know you'll get the slides later. So it gives you a sense of where we're at in terms of mobility, stamina and dexterity, quite clearly being forerunners of self-reported difficulty versus what I would argue society often thinks of in terms of hearing and vision. So by all means do interrogate that graph later. So we'll all be familiar with this idea that instead to ask somebody, do you have a disability? The like answer will be more likely to be no. So what we do is we phrase the questions in terms of, do you have any difficulties in the activities of daily living or the instrumental activities of daily living? So they're simple things. And what you through this presentation is that actually there are many, many, many things that you can do that are either for extremely low cost or part of housekeeping that actually can improve people's ability to do these things, or at the very least reduce the risk of accident and impairment that are avoidable, that actually, unless you avoid them, can bring about premature aging and the loss of independence. So that's what we're going to show and illustrate to you today, I hope. Okay, so we're going into the main bit of the session now. So it's called Simple, Effective and Proactive Tips for Housing Professionals. We're architects. I'm an architect, and Kate's not only a building specialist, but she's also a specialist at disability training and meeting the needs of disabled students. And so we enter into your world today from, if you like, an architectural perspective. So we hope and we know very well that we can work very well together. So you bring your own areas of expertise and share those with us as we go through the session, please do. But we're sharing, so we're trying to look for the overlaps between an architectural intervention, the role of prevention in that, and the work that you do in terms of reablement and adaptations within the home. So we come with that spirit and come forward. So what we're looking for is to avoid those banana slips. So what can we do before an accident happens? What can we do to stop someone losing confidence? What can we do to keep somebody living independently and doing it confidently? So these are the 6 main things that I would say are the things to think about when you're going out and about, or you're visiting a home. What are the extra things? You might be going out for something specific. It may be that somebody's having some grab rails fitted. It may be that you're measuring, or you're looking, or you're surveying for a wet room adaptation. But actually our mind has this incredible photographic ability to observe all that's around us. And so you may be coming in for an individual task, but actually what else can you spot? Is there a way to say, actually, yes, it's great, we're going to put grab rails and the walls are capable of taking the grab rails, or whatever it is that you're finding. but you know what? I've actually seen some pretty poor quality flooring in this house, or the lighting in that room is terrible. Gosh, you know, that's going to be a difficult bathroom to use, particularly if somebody has a stoma or is taking medications there, or, you know, injecting medication, something like that. So these are the 6 things that I would say carry in your mind, carry on a notebook, and take with you to just keep an eye on. We're going to look at this in a moment. We're going to look at it with a sort of dive into a lady called Maggie's front room. And then we're going to stop for some questions, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail about all of these 6 things. So we're going to be looking through this. So it's trip and slip hazards. Let's stop those accidents happening and stopping that crisis coming in the first place. Lighting to enable safer living and more confident living. The ease of use, easy little things about dexterity, the safety and security, the maintenance, and the healthy home. So try and hold those 6 things in your mind's eye while we go into Maggie's front room. Here's Maggie, and Maggie is absolutely fine. And this is a common thing that we find when we're going into people's homes to carry out assessments, is that people don't see the need to make small changes. They're working around any of the barriers and the challenges in the home. They don't see the need to do it, and it's our job to try and help people to articulate and understand that actually some small changes can make a really big difference to staying fine, and that's the main thing. Okay, so what are we going to see in Maggie's front room? Here we are, an ordinary front room like you would see in you know, all sorts of houses up and down the country, and if you're tuning in from abroad, probably similar to those houses as well. So here is Maggie. She's just come in from a shopping trip. She's catching up on the day's papers, having a cup of tea. What you'll see is that she's got a preferred armchair and another sofa for other visitors to come. There's a door behind her chair that she comes through, and the telephone is on the diagonally opposite side of the room. So going back to those 6 criteria, those 6 things, what can you spot in this room? We're going to have a look at them now, in the order of actually the incidents that we find them. So you might be surprised to find that the most common issue that we see is lighting. Poor quality lighting, lighting in the wrong place, insufficient lighting, or lighting that's hard to maintain. And we will look at that as part of this session. So lighting. I suspect most of you have spotted the issues and challenges with the trip hazards, and, you know, the loose laid rug that's slightly rucked. Not only is it loose laid and slightly rucked, but it's also on that main route where Maggie is likely to be rushing between the door that's behind her preferred armchair over to the telephone that to you and I would probably, we could reasonably assume doesn't have an answer phone attached to it. It may have a dial through answer phone service, but it's not a modern telephone. So she has that. We have trailing cables, and also if Maggie were to trip, or somebody were to trip over the low level furniture, then there are sharp corners so that there is no attenuation to the fall. Actually, those hard edges are more likely to cause injurious injuries, or become an injurious fall. We've also got things that might be hard to reach. Is there anything when you go out and about and you look at a house, might even be your own house, turn your mind's eye to your own house if you want to, is there anything that's actually been difficult to maintain? Is there anything that's awkward, that's dangerous, that requires you to go up a stool? Anything that requires you to reach uncomfortably, or that causes real difficulty to be able to get to? And is there anything that you can do about it? And then, of course, there are the ordinary things of living. What does somebody's household look like? Are they coping with the everyday tasks? If the house is messy and dirty, what's that telling you? We look at that again in a little bit further in. We're not advocating, of course, that one should get rid of pets, but it's worth noting that they do become a trip hazard. And so, actually having the minimal amount of clutter apart from the animal around, of course, they have huge therapeutic benefits, is an advantage to have. Okay, so I hope you spotted at least a few of those things. We're going to make some small changes to Maggie's front room now, and I want you to try and spot the differences, see what it is, and also have a think about whether this has fundamentally changed, whether this is Maggie's home, or whether actually it still feels like Maggie's home, but just the furniture has been moved around a bit. And I hope you're answering to yourselves the latter, that actually this still feels very much like Maggie's home. We've kept it the same, but with some small adjustments. So what have we changed? Well, we have relocated those things that are hard to access. The plant is an illustration of that. It could be all sorts of other things. We've upgraded the lighting, and bear with me, I'll tell you all about the lighting later on in the presentation, but if you've got any specific questions, by all means do. And importantly, what we've done is we've given Maggie a really good quality task light for where she's reading, and task lighting is so incredibly important, just for general eye health, as well as for anybody that might have visual impairment or some kind of vision loss at all. So we can, really boost eye health by having good quality lighting. We've also, what else have we done? Where's it gone? Well, the cat's still there. That's a good thing. I'm sure you'll agree. So what we've done is we've created a more substantial table and chairs. We've just swapped 2 tables around from within the room so that Maggie can actually sit at the telephone. She can write more carefully. We've tidied the cables away, and we've sorted out that area just to make it a little bit more simple. The table and the rug haven't gone. They've been relocated to a place that don't form a major route through somewhere, so that Maggie's or her guests are unlikely to be rushing through the space. So they're still there. She still has her possessions. We've put them and suggested we put them into a slightly more convivial space, a more suitable space for the use of this particular room. Okay, so really simple changes. I hope you feel that that still looks like Maggie's, albeit cartoon, home, to illustrate the point. I think what we'll do now, we're about to go into this. This is what we're about to cover: falls prevention, lighting, usability, safety and security, and healthy spaces. But I think this is a good time to stop and get some questions. And I'm sure Kate will put her microphone on and read out to us some of the questions, and hopefully myself and Kate will be able to answer those now, or we'll say that we're coming to that, in this next section.
Kate. Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me. We've had a few questions, mainly about subjects that are going to be covered later on in the presentation. And I've just been keeping track of the time, which is one of my additional jobs. Yes. And it is nearly 2:30, and I know we've still got a lot to get through.
Yes,
I think perhaps I think it might be a good idea to think about, hopefully, well, I encourage you all to put any questions or comments up that we can potentially address at the end if things haven't been covered. Just to give a slightly longer amount of time at the end. There have been some issues about your microphone dropping out, Emma, which we've been trying to address, but it's coming through much better now. I think it was around the time when we had the polls on the call. So, but please, the session is being recorded, so I'm sure people will be able to look back. We'll be able to go back if they've missed anything in particular. So Super. I suppose at the moment there's nothing particularly that needs to be addressed, and I will, and I also have been trying to answer questions in the chat as they've been coming through.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you, boss. Right, I shall make sure that we move at an appropriate speed to get you all away by sort of 3 o'clock. Thanks, Kate.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Okay, so we're going to go into this part of the main part of the presentation, and we're going to be looking at these 5 categories. The reality is we could actually talk for days and days and days, and as a small plug, we do have a training course coming up later on in the year, which we'll tell you about towards the end of the session. But I've picked these 5 items because I think they're the most doable, and I think they're the quickest fixes, and I think they're the things that really you can build into the work that you do quite seamlessly without necessarily costing the public purse or the household any more money. So falling over is really expensive. We need to try and stop people from falling over. So spotting the risks of falls and the things that buildings bring in. Now I'm not talking about polypharmacy and the individual human factors risks. That's your job already. But I'm talking about what risks does the home present. Why do we need to do that? Well, actually, because we don't want people to fall, because that fall starts a cycle of, whether it's injurious or not, a cycle of inactivity and a fear of falling, and it builds on itself. So we need to somehow break that cycle in as many households as we possibly can. And we do know, we have the evidence to show that, in fact, small modifications in a home have a huge impact, and I'll show you the statistics for that later on in the presentation. So what are the most common hazards? Loose cables. What are they telling you? Well, they're telling you that the appliance that's plugged in and the plug or the socket aren't working well together. They need to be resolved. They need to be sorted. There may not be enough power sockets. The TV socket might be in the wrong place, something like that. Simply offering cable clips to tidy up those may be one way to do it, or perhaps extending the number of plug sockets. That would require an electrician, of course, extending that. But what is it telling you, and can you do some short fixes? Loose rugs and mats may have a place, but they rarely have a place if they're the kind of rug that you can see here, which doesn't have a rubber-backed surface to it to prevent it from moving and rucking. Similarly, if it's a very deep pile rug, our brains program our movements to such a precise amount that actually that is in itself can become a hazard. So rugs and mats in the right place to absorb water, to stop further slips and spills and trips, is okay, but you know, they must have a rubber back, and they must be as low as short pile as you possibly have them, and of course as water absorbent as you can. Will have seen this step. How many of you could easily and identify this single? This is a crucial thing. How can I think my microphone might have cut out there, so I'll just repeat. Steps are very hard to identify, and especially if they're not well marked. A simple solution for this particular step would be to just varnish around the edge of that step in a darker, sand back a little bit, varnish a darker varnish, so you begin to establish a nosing, a contrast at the nosing to allow people to see. Loose, wet, shiny or pre-flooring hazards for all sorts of people. The shininess may cause distress for somebody with dementia or somebody with a visual impairment. Loose and wet is hazardous for everybody. So what can you do about it? Is there something to reaffix? Perhaps reduce the polishing regime if that's something that's being used. Apply an anti-slip polish. Remember, there's no such thing as non-slip and it's anti, so it's reducing the risk of it. And of course, stairs. I'm sure many of you could spend a good few minutes looking at this staircase and identifying the risks that are there. There are numerous, they're slippery, they have open risers, the contrast of the bottom step with the flooring is terrible, and so on and so forth. There are many, many, many features that we'd look at. So what sorts of things are there? But actually, there are some quite good features about this. As much as the carpet at the top, albeit loose laid, so we'd be fixing that back down, but actually contrasts very well. There's a strong contrast between the carpet and the stair. It gives you a prior visual warning, as well as the surface material being different actually on this occasion, so that you would get a sense that you were traveling into a different surface area. So in terms of the top tips, quick fixes, while you're in a house, even if you're just looking at grab and you can start to play with the use of natural light and artificial light together to begin to regulate not only everybody's hormonal balance and their circadian rhythm, but even actually beginning to modulate and manage some of the symptoms of some dementia conditions. It also helps to reduce the dependence on artificial lighting, and we're going to have a look at why artificial lighting can be detrimental in the next slide. So the important thing for you to think about is, which way is south? What rooms, or in other words, what rooms face north? North-facing rooms very rarely get any useful sunlight in them, and that affects the amount of daylight, or the quality, I should say, of daylight and the amount of daylight that enters the room. So if you're looking at trying to boost your own health benefits or somebody in your household, find a bright and sunny spot by a window and place a chair there. If you're wondering how you work out where south is, go on to Google Maps or anything like that, and the bottom of the screen is south, the top of the screen is north, and you've got east, west on either side. So it's relatively easy to find that. Of course, if you're in Australia, you will get the benefits of the sun to the north of the property and not to the south. Now, artificial lighting. This is a real weakness in so many homes. Is there enough of it? Is it in the right place? is it easily operated, and how easy is it to change the bulb? So we've got a range of different types of lighting that we look at. We've got area lighting that give the general purpose light level in the space. We've got ambience lighting that sounds a bit romantic, sounds a bit flamboyant, but actually can begin to adjust and improve your mood. It's the kind of lighting systems that we use when we come to work with people with dementia. And then, of course, we do need task lighting in those key places: the bathrooms, the kitchens, the hobby spaces, the activity spaces. And last, but by no means least, that security and safety lighting. So we've got to choose lighting to suit the task at hand, and we've got to change or replace unsuitable bulbs. What are unsuitable bulbs? Well, they tend to be these older style compact fluorescent tubes. So the lady is holding in this slide an illuminated LED bulb, and in her other hand a coil, which is called a compact fluorescent tubes. Now the challenge with these tubes is they never die. They take years and years and years to finally stop working. But in the meantime, the quality of the light output and the level of the light output degrades quite substantially. So we have environments where, or actually gradually over time, so the household doesn't necessarily notice, they find themselves operating in really, really poor quality light environments. So the good news is there is a great science behind it. We don't have time to go into that now. We go into it in the training course, but there's access to really good quality light bulbs for not much more than actually the light bulbs that you or I would buy anyway. So for instance, this light bulb by Philips is specifically designed to produce a good color rendition. That's a really good quality light, and a good light output, and to not fade away, to not lose efficacy at the same rate as some of the other bulbs do. So that's a really quick fix. And if you're looking for a budget buster like we put in Maggie's house, you can go to a company like Serious Readers, which is a lighting science manufacturing company that does amazing lights. From anywhere from £250. So I recognise that those of you operating on publicly funded budgets, that's unlikely, but at least you know about it. If you don't know about it, you can't then suggest it to some of your households, or even for family and friends as well. Right. Ease of use, usability, this is so important. So we have taps here that are, older, still functioning perfectly well. The basin's not chipped, not necessarily any reason to replace this basin. It's set in a vanity unit. That gives a space for somebody to lean on, to grip. There's space either side to put their items down. So in many ways it works well. But it requires good manual dexterity. So in terms of looking at that, we're not necessarily saying you even need to replace the whole basin, but it may be that you can think about replacing the taps for a single, with obviously you'd have to cap the other tap off, with a single lever action mixer tap, and it can look good. It doesn't have to be really expensive, and it can suddenly mean that somebody can use that tap much more easily, that perhaps it means they're more likely to wash or to stay hygienic. Perhaps it means that they can do so without pain or fatigue. So think about that. Can taps and controls be used by a clenched fist or an elbow? That's considered the basic test of usability. If it can be used by those two things, then you're onto something good as a general solution. Of course, you may well have service users that need something much more specific, and you need to test it out with them. Right, loos. The normal standard household toilet that you might find is on the left-hand side of the screen. So it's a WC with a separate cistern, nice flush handle, well-contrasted toilet seat, all very good. Toilet papers close by. But when you interrogate the service user more, what you find is actually this service user was using that plastic toilet roll holder and the shelves next to that to prop and to stand up and to sit down on the toilet. So really, obviously what they needed was grab rails. But not only that, is these shelves are unstable, so you've got the increased risk of falling over. You've got the sharp corners. You've got the really quite poor lighting conditions and quite poor quite poor contrast, except for the floor and the wall and the toilet seat. I'm going to touch on contrast in the next slide, so bear with me on that. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a really, really, really lovely, beautiful and expensive toilet. Of course, not everybody can install something like this, but there is a halfway house. There is a way to think about by keeping up to date with what's coming to the market. Some of you will have seen the Invisible Creations toilet roll and grab rail holders. You will have seen that actually sometimes investing a little bit more money into something, not necessarily this gold-plated toilet, but you know, investing in something just by thinking around the problem a little bit more, you can deliver a solution that has a real longevity to it, that means that somebody is also quite pleased to use it and feels quite proud of their home still. We know people delay making changes because they don't want their home to look medicalised. Okay, I said something about contrast here. A good tip to know how to test out the contrast between features is to turn the photo into black and white. And here what I've done is I've actually pixelated it to represent. Now, this is not a fair representation of visual impairment, because as you all know, visual impairment comes in many, many, many shapes and guises. But this quick adjustment and adaptation and test on the photos, alteration to the photos, gives me a really good indication. Actually, it begins to show me that in the gold-plated toilet, the toilet is standing out really, really well against the background. So you might have a great toilet already, and what it takes is actually painting the background wall rather than replacing the toilet. So try and think around the problems to improve identification of items and what you can do about it. Again, absolutely, without having to spend a fortune. We worked with a gentleman with visual impairment who found the incorporation of shiny kettles and toasters, etc., incredibly useful into his kitchen. We know that often in terms of working with somebody with dementia, shiny surfaces cause disorientation. So there's always going to be a balance between, well, there's always got to be a direct response to the individual that you're working with. What do they need? What's going to benefit them the most? The man that we worked with in terms of the kettle and the toaster, all we did was replace the kitchen handles and put those shiny objects in, because what had happened before was he was scalding himself and he was afraid to put his hands around the kitchen because he couldn't quite judge the depth perception, and found that some under-counter lighting, those shiny objects, suddenly made him feel more confident about working in that counter area and was able to do some more food preparation for himself. So it always has to be a direct response. Now, people still need to wash and they still need to dry their clothes, and they may still want to do activities in the garden. It's incredibly good for you to be outside. We want people to be outside for as much of the day as possible. So facilitating that and thinking about that. Now, I know in terms of the DFG, it is difficult to know what it is that you're able to do in terms, we know you can get access to the garden, but how much of the garden? And that, of course, sometimes comes down to a local interpretation. But what kind of garden activities? In the photo that you can see here, you can see that the grey aged paving slabs contrast quite well with the grass in terms of colour, but there's a small step up just to the right hand side that's by the orange plant, and actually that isn't well identified, and so somebody could inadvertently trip, particularly if that happened to be, as in the case of this, if that happened to be south facing, so you're potentially looking into the sun as you walk in that direction. 5 millimeters. Our brain programs our movements often to within 5 millimeters. So anything in terms of the health and safety executive, anything over 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter is considered a significant trip risk or hazard. So be really aware, even if you feel confident moving around that space, actually, what are those little things? It only takes a small lapse in concentration, or for somebody to be carrying something at the same time as the doorbell's going, for all of a sudden those very small changes to become a trip hazard. In architectural terms, we talk about a deviation of no more than 3 millimeters in a 1 meter long surface area. So that gives you some idea of the precision that we're expected to work with. Okay, Bins. It would be so simple to put some paving slabs in front of the paving slabs that are underneath the bins at the moment, so that actually you're not hoiking the bins up and down off of this ledge. So very simple and cheap and affordable interventions. And actually, I think that with a bit of imagination and thinking around the problem, actually adaptations can be really attractive and can in some ways actually enhance the building. I think this is a really good example of these very simple bent scaffolding poles that have been painted to match the same colour as the door. I think it's a really beautiful example of very simple adaptations that can make a big difference to the householder. Okay, so my suggestion to you for this bit is just keep up to date with new solutions. Keep looking for those new products. Some of them are coming to the market, and actually they're not necessarily any more expensive than the objects and the approved items that you might be working with now. I know that takes some internal fight or potentially internal debate or the art of persuasion to get some new things incorporated into the way you do things in some of your services, but perhaps just keep your mind out, keep your eyes open and see what might be coming forward to really deliver that extra value to not only yourself, but of course the household as well, that might then experience even more improved independence. Safety and security. We know that if people don't feel safe at they won't their home, and so we want to feel safe, because actually what we really want is we really want people to be able to live and be active, and we want people to be active and leave their home at as many opportunities as we can, because we know that one of the issues with later life, and particularly in the lockdown era, of course, is a lack of activity leads to conditions and challenges. Just want to introduce you to two products that you may not have seen, not on that. Erica release lock. This is an ordinary Yale type lock that is connected to an internal chain. So when somebody comes along with the right key, the chain on the door is released. So this is a fantastic way to allow somebody in the house to feel safe, but also be able to get that safe, you know, that kind of support and care if they need it, even while the chain is on. When you're looking at a key safe, what I would suggest to you is that you go to the secured manufacturers. This means that the key safes are really and often more secure than the house that you're dealing with itself. So I mentioned earlier about a healthy home. A healthy home helps to keep healthy. It helps us getting poorly through all sorts of different ways. So what is a healthy humidity? Well, it's around 50 to 55%. What we often find in homes is actually we're talking around about 80 to 85%. It makes it much more expensive to heat it. It makes us much more likely to get poorly, and it makes it much more likely for the home to develop damp and mold. So it's really something to monitor. You could even have one of these in your kit. It's not Christmas time. Ask for one for Christmas, and it's not even Easter time, but for a simple £15 investment, you can carry a monitor around with you and actually see what the humidity in a home is, and that gives you a sense of what, you know, where somebody is and the likely implications of that damp within the home. It's not going to be percentage accurate at £15, but it will give you a very good sense. So while you're out and about, look for signs of damp or mold or other moisture in the home, or if somebody doesn't have private outdoor space, you're much more likely to come across high levels of humidity because they're drying their clothes within the home as well. Similarly, certain generations of double glazing, they don't have trickle ventilation, and that compounds the issue of the damp air because it traps it inside the building. Right, coming up towards the end of this, look out for these things. Again, use that photographic ability of your mind's eye to capture it. Have a look around you and ask these questions. When you see the kitchen that you can see in this slide, it's a little bit chaotic, it's busy, it's got lots of stuff in it. Is it the result of a busy day? Is it that it's too small? Or is it actually an indication that somebody is spending so long carrying out the basic activities of daily living, they either don't have the energy or they don't have the time to undertake the basic elements of tidying and sorting, and you know, and it may be that they don't have the motivation or they're not ready to participate in that sort of thing, but you know, just use that mind's eye of yours to go out and see whether there's anything else you can add into your recommendations or the work that you're doing to improve people's lives. So we're going to have a look now at a case study, and this is about future-proofing. What was an already adapted home? Mr. and Mrs. Dixon both have mobility difficulties. Mrs. Dixon struggles with reaching and bending as well as walking long distances, and Mr. Dixon has a history of falls, so he has a little bit of a challenge with his vestibular sense, and he has a tendency to fall over, compounded by a visual impairment and a hearing impairment. So, and you can clearly see from the photograph that actually there's a big height difference between them as well. So there were some reach range issues. One of the greatest difficulties for them was that Mrs. Dixon's mobility scooter was tipping off the corner of this path, and that Mr. Dixon was tripping over the threshold. It was only 60 millimeters. But if you remember from earlier on, I talked about the brain programming movements to only, to within 5 millimeters, and the maximum height of a threshold is actually being 15 millimeters. And because Mr. Dixon also has some cognitive difficulty and gets easily distracted, he was tripping over that quite a lot. So really simple investment, chamfering off the corner, new paving slabs to match the levels that were there already. The gradients were fine, that was no problem. And we very slightly lifted and tilted the paving slabs up to reduce the trip hazard going into the property. He was actually fine coming out. It was the going in after he'd had a busy day and his mind was full of things that actually he was tripping into the house and tripping over that threshold. We of course could do this in quite a simple way because the door is under in a porch. So in terms of water ingress, we just had to make sure that the drain was well and effective at the edge of that sort of porch area, and we could manage the water ingress and keep the rainwater away using those various devices. The kitchen had really bad contrast, didn't have good reach ranges, and was generally very, very difficult for both Mr. and Mrs. Dixon to use. And so we did do a new kitchen. This was in conjunction with Alison Swarbrick Architects. The things that we added into the science or of the specification, if you like, were the working triangle. So from the fridge on the right-hand side to the sink in the middle to the oven on the side, there is a continuous counter. That gives both of them a chance to easily navigate around the space, to move items between those various three things without having to lift and travel over open space, and gives them something to hold on to. And for Mr. Dixon, it was incredibly handy. He could just brush the back of his hand against the countertop so he knew exactly where everything was. It became very familiar to him. We put a waist height oven in. This was a posh one. It was a slide and hide, lucky Mrs. Dixon, so that she didn't have to bend to get things out of the oven. And of course, she's got counter right next to it, so she can put those items straight out onto the surface as well. She doesn't have to hold and carry them. And one of my sort of favourite small adaptations to a kitchen are these drop-down shelves. I know you have to be careful about how you specify them and getting sure that you get a good quality version of it, but they unlock so much of that storage space that otherwise is often unavailable to many, many householders, or necessitates them climbing on a stool, which is something that we really want to try and avoid if we can. And then just dipping outside into the garden, they didn't use this garden. There were too many hazards. Neither of them felt comfortable stepping down a single step without a grab rail or something there to take hold of. And the grass was too steep. And when it was wet, it was incredibly slippery. So they just simply, you can tell how unloved that garden is. So we put in, as part of the works, we put in some composite decking. That's what you see here. It's like a plasticized timber that doesn't rot or takes a lot longer to degrade. And we've got a step-free exit out of the doors, nice wide doors in case either of them do need to use a wheelchair full time, which Mrs. Dixon is likely to do. And we've just rationalised the pots, and what Mrs. Dixon is planning on doing, a good practice measure is to have waist height planting stand there as well, so she can access those more easily. So a happy Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. They would never have done this unless their daughter had got the professionals involved. They hadn't had a life-changing event to necessitate it, so they hadn't come across an OT at this point. But I think it's a really good thing that she said, basically she said, we didn't realise how difficult it was until the changes came. And what we're trying to do is make the absence of difficulty lead to longer independent living and more confident living. Okay, so why should we be doing this? Why do we all need to work to the same agenda? Well, we know there's a 39% reduction in injurious falls after small home modifications, and we're talking about a sort of installation of a grab rail or improvement in the lighting. 77% of people reported better mental health, and 75% reported improved independence. So that's an incredible change for an investment of, £500 or less. And the good news is the market is changing, so adaptations can look good. They don't have to look institutionalized. They don't have to make a home look institutional when procured safely. So those statistics have come from the Centre for Ageing Better. If you haven't come across them and you're interested in this topic, goodness, go and pay a visit to their website. They have so much information available to them. Okay, so just coming up now, nearly towards the end, the potential costs and returns on investment. So the financial return on investment in investing in small home modifications, so the preventative measures, is 3 times that which is spent. That's a compelling. We don't have the systems in place really to do that well yet, but I live hope springs eternal. And a social return on investment of nearly 7.5 times. That's about that feeling good, that living independently, feeling confident. And that in turn means people are out in the economy, spending money, contributing to society. It's an imperative. The costs of not doing them is direct. So almost £50,000 is attributed to the cost of falling, resulting in a hip fracture. £28,000 to the NHS and the care sector for that early reablement, and £20,000 to the family. So we have got to start building in these preventative measures to save money. Where do we sit? We sit bang splat in the middle of all of these. So we are in the prevention pocket between independence and social care, the NHS and healthcare, and housing and homes. And we want to work, and we do work in all of these sectors. So let us know how we can work with you. That would be fantastic. I absolutely recognise that we're a private company. We are a social enterprise, so we reinvest our profits back into the work that we do. So we are not a win quick and disappear overnight kind of an organisation. I'm very keen to reassure you of that. We have a social purpose that overrides everything that we do. Just a quick plug, we have some training coming up in September, and we'll put a link in that in the chat box, or Kate will be putting a link in that. But just want to show you a really quick video about how and what it is that we do. So our main service is the home check service. I started the company about 3 or 4 years ago. I've been working in the field for ages, and I saw that many consultants were doing a really good job. But what I did notice is that individual households didn't know where to turn to plan for later life. And I heard more often than not the story about, oh, they're taking me out in a wooden box. Oh, I'm never going anywhere. I'm not going. But actually, we want people to have that choice. But when you have a life-changing event, you don't always have that choice. We know that people can inadvertently end up having to go into a residential setting because they can't. So we do the home check to spot the opportunities, the barriers, and the risks so that people can actually start to take steps themselves. We do it in a language that individual households can understand. Moving a rug, changing a light bulb, giving them resources, showing them where to go. When we go into a home, we take about 500 different bits of information. So we really did need to have a special data collection app. So we use an app that gathers that data, and it's a kind of smart logic. Sounds very posh, and it was very, very complicated to make. But it results in a magazine style report. So people can really kind of dip in and pick out and choose what it is that they want to do. They get a sense of how much it's going to cost them. They can do it when they're ready. That's really important. And most importantly, they can share it with other people. So if you're a reablement OT, let's say, and bringing people out of the hospital, if they've already had a home check, you already know how high the step is because we've identified it, so that it has a longer term benefit as well. So we want to work together with everybody. How can you help us? Well, what we'd really like you to do is to start to embed what you've listened here and take it out into your practice. That will have the biggest impact of all. But do tell your service users as well that actually they can future-proof their home, and they can do it for very little money. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for joining us all the way through the session. Just a reminder, if you want to join us on the Home Check Assessor training, that's the 10th and the 11th of September. If Kate hasn't already, she'll be putting the link in the chat box, so you can find that, or you can come straight to our website and find out about that as well. You don't have to become a Home Check Assessor, you can just add it to your portfolio of knowledge in the practice that you do. But we've just got some time now for some questions, so I'll stop talking. And we'll take some questions and hopefully give you some answers. If we can't answer them all, I promise I will send out a response via Paul to everybody that's attended.
Hello, sorry, it's Kate again. I'm really conscious that it's now got to 3 o'clock, so people probably do need to depart. So people who have been asking questions, if I haven't been able to answer them directly, I've been replying to you privately, and we will get back to you. It's more been a series, lots of comments about things, people raising questions about funding that's potentially available, and also adding specific comments, particularly about lighting and some of the issues that there can be around people, perhaps larger people, using certain bits of equipment, which I think some of it has you've definitely covered, Emma, in your talk about how you do need to create an environment that suits the homeowner and the individual and their circumstances. So I think really there aren't any very specific questions to follow up on that I don't need to, that we can't directly respond to later on.
Okay, that's fine then. That's great. Thank you. I know that I gave you a lot of information, and the truth is, actually, it doesn't even in a way touch the surface. But I hope that you'll be able to take all these things out with you and put them into your own practice. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming to the session today. Do stay in touch. I've got my contact details there. You can join me on LinkedIn, or you can join us on any of our social media channels. And look forward to hearing from you soon.
Great, thank you, Emma. Thank you, Kate. That's been a really interesting session. I saw lots of engagement in the chat, so I think lots of people have enjoyed that as well, and almost everybody stayed till the end as well. So that's always a good sign.
Yes.
So we'll get a recording and upload it later in the week for anybody who missed any of it. If you're okay to share the slides, we'll share those as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the attendees, when you get the slides, you are welcome to share them with other colleagues as well. Of course, the voice, tells more than the picture itself, but do share as well. Do get the word out there.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all. I will close it to that, and we'll be back with the Foundations webinar in a fortnight. So thank you, Emma. Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for turning up today. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.